All right. Welcome everybody to the Breathe 911 podcast. Today we are with Ben Pelton. Ben is from Miami, Florida. Hometown. Ben played lacrosse growing up and in college, a defenseman for Florida State University. Ben is I would call him, from what I've seen, is a mobility expert, Wim Hof level 2 instructor, oxygen advanced instructor trainer. Ben, I believe you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here, but recent purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and
Yeah,
loves his hydration, loves his breathing, and we're just going to have a conversation about all the things that Ben's up to and Ben's interested in. And yeah, how'd I do?
awesome. Awesome. Excited to be here with you.
Bro, give me because this is our first time meeting without over text or Instagram. Man, give me like a brief background on you and what you're all about.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. But yeah, from Miami, I was an athlete my entire life. Because of my athletics, I went to FSU to play sports. And then I graduated and realized I graduated with my degree in philosophy. I realized that I enjoyed coaching. So I did some coaching for FSU's lacrosse team and then some of the local club teams. And then from there, just got into more physical therapy, helping people feel better. I had my own story, my own issues with lower back pain from trying to be a bodybuilder and a yogi at the same time. The spine doesn't like that. So I was suffering from, episodic back pain, and that really pushed me on this journey of like figuring out solving lower back pain. And then that took me into breath work because in order to resolve your spine, you got to really have control over your diaphragm. So from there, I just got deep into breath work and therapy, and then I stumbled into jujitsu. And then next thing you know, 5 years later, I'm a purple belt in jujitsu.
That's amazing. 5 years.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
been
pretty.
working.
That's pretty
Yeah,
quick. You've been working hard.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
like so. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is. I've never trained any martial arts, but it's now so many people in my world have been like it's brought into my space, right? And I'm like, all right, at some point I gotta, because I know how humbling it's gonna be.
Well, I think the most important thing for people to recognize is how important self-defense is. It's just
Right.
understanding some simple techniques that you can use to defend yourself if you needed to deal with some situation or maybe even save someone that's going through something difficult. You can use your skills through jujitsu to help with that situation.
So, question about jujitsu. So you train a lot. Do you train for, because you're a former athlete? I mean, you're a current athlete, but a former like collegiate athlete. Do you train? What's the best part for you? Is it the training? Is it the competition? Because I see you do compete a bit. Uh,
Yeah, so I'm
is it
competing this
is it the
weekend.
community or
Um, First, it was just a new movement practice. I had people that told me like you would be really good at jujitsu based on my mobility practices and my movement practices. So when they told me, "Hey, join jujitsu," I wasn't really into it. And then when I moved to a new city, I decided I wanted to join a community, and so I just looked up jujitsu, and then I found this master instructor there, and decided to join the community. Day one, I already knew it was for me. I just realized that this was a cool martial art. I never done martial art my entire life, so this was my first time doing a martial art, and it's an amazing practice. So, what I really do for me is just being an athlete, being consistently training, improving myself, and then really the biggest thing for me was the self defense. Like I didn't know how to fight, I didn't know how to defend myself. When you learn that and you actually practice it and then go and test yourself in a competition and you realize you can do it, you can actually defend yourself against another grown man. It's very empowering. It's very empowering to realize like, okay, you can handle yourself.
it's like that? It's that man in the ring, right? Like you're not necessarily fearful of any other. I mean, you never know who's got training, but necessarily on the street, right? Like I don't have to be afraid, right? I know if I get in a fight, or if someone needs protection, I can step up. That's really cool.
Yeah, I try to say like if they don't know training, then they mess with the wrong guy. It's like they just
Right.
shouldn't have barked up that tree if they really did something silly.
Right. Right. Cool, man. Well, and then like tell me a bit. So you say you got into breath work. I know you're into Wim Hof stuff. Um, I know you do a lot or have done a lot with them. How did you like? what was the entry? So for me, it was Wim Hof was the entry point into the breath work, which led into the cold and all that stuff. It was actually the reverse. It was the cold that led into the breath work for me. How did you find, and I literally found Wim on YouTube. Like that was my
Yeah.
journey. Like, how did you come across that?
So my journey with breathwork started back in like high school when I went to a yoga studio here in Miami and I actually got introduced to some breathwork through yoga. And then pranayama practices, single nose, in, out, all those different techniques. I was already practicing it way before I heard about Wim Hof. Probably like 2010 is when I was really learning about the pranayama and the yogic breath practices. But yeah, I was in a physical therapy Facebook group and someone posted a link to a Tim Ferriss podcast with Wim Hof. And I listened to that and I was like, wait a second, this human climbed Mount Everest in a bathing suit. How is that possible? And yeah, that was it. I listened to him. I knew I wanted to meet him. Then I started watching the Vice documentary and all these things. And then yeah, I just knew I needed to meet him. Like before there was even a concept of being an instructor for him, I wanted to just meet Wim.
Right, be around that energy.
For sure. So I was gonna go to Spain and do this expedition with him in Spain. And as I was like researching the logistics through the website, a new tab popped up and it was Academy. And I thought, wait a second, this is perfect. Like I'm already an instructor in all these other methodologies for physical therapy. Wait, I can become a Wim Hof instructor? How cool. And so there was 50 spots for this LA level 2 days, event, educational thing. And I'm like, 50 spots, I'm signing up right now. Boom. And I committed. And then, yeah, from there, they narrowed it down to 26 of us that got invited for the actual certification 5-day process with Wim in Colorado. And yeah, they accepted me. And that's the history.
That's amazing. What year was that?
That was in 2016.
Amazing. So you've been coaching people through Wim Hof stuff for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I call myself the founding father, or the group we call it the Alpha Team. Like
Right.
we're the original group that
That's
set up
amazing.
in the U.S.
That's so cool. Awesome. I heard an interview, or I watched an interview or a podcast with you, getting into like some cold stuff, where you guys were up with Wim. I think it was in Colorado, and he took you guys to another level. I remember you talking about when you got out, your feet felt like bricks, like just solid bricks. And the story you told about, putting your wool socks on, right? It's like it like slipped, and I think it would be interesting to you recount that story, and then also to talk about, because when I take people through cold, everyone's like, my feet hurt. It's like, yeah, like there's no blood, like all the blood is going to your core, like your extremities it's gonna hurt. I think people underestimate how much it hurts and how long that they can maybe sit in that comfort in the danger zone within that. And I think it'd just be interesting to talk about, like, because you said you kind of got to that next level, of you. Oh, I can go a lot farther than I think. I think that'd be kind of interesting to recount that story and maybe pull a lesson out of that.
Sure. In Colorado, it was the instructors. It was the 26 of us, and we got into this mucky, like, this is gross pond that was just barely freezing over.
Or like
And
they didn't scout the location beforehand, eh? They saw
no,
the
of
map, was like,
course.
oh, there's water.
Yeah, they're like, we're coming all the way from Europe, so let's cross our fingers. Let's hope Colorado's got the spot. Yeah, so we found this pond and like runoff, and yeah, we got in, and they just kept us in, and you could see everyone shivering over the water. You just see these ripples of everyone just shaking, and no one's gonna be the one to quit, right? No one wants to be the one to be like, okay, I'm done. This is too much for me. Like, hello. So yeah, we just kept cruising, and it just kept shivering and kept just pushing through that discomfort. And then of course, when it's time to get out, everyone's excited, and we start getting our bearings together. And I'm looking for my warm gear because we have to walk. We walked, I think, about an hour. It was like an hour hike in the cold before we got to the pond. And then once we got to the pond, yeah, and of course, you know, you want to test yourself. So I wore my t-shirt and shorts, you know, some people had jackets on, but I was like, no, we're going. So already sending the cold therapy in process through the hike, get in the cold water, freeze in the cold water, get out. Now it's time to go back. So I tried to put on my gear, and as I'm putting on my socks, I just can't get it on my foot. I'm shivering. I'm like really trying to focus. And I realized that, you know, I didn't want to waste more time or more energy being colder than I had to be. So I really had to deep dive in and focus and just take the time. Like, let's do this one more time correctly, and just slid on the socks, and it all worked out. So, you know, I guess a good lesson out of that is just being focused, really taking the time to have confidence in yourself and realize that if you really focus, you can get the task done.
And were you worried all about the level of like frostbite or cold, or like, were you like your feet, we said were like bricks? Were you worried at all? Like, shoot, like,
No,
no.
no, because I already was training like intensely. I had a freezer in Florida that I was bathing in and taking really cold ice baths in the freezer. I was preparing for this expedition and certification, thinking that like it's going to be like the Vice video, like just chaos. And to be honest, we were there in a time period where the snow wasn't fully everywhere, and I felt like it could have been a more intense experience. So I started talking to some of the other instructors, and they're like, "Oh, have you been to Poland?" And I'm like, "What's in Poland?" They're like, "Mount Sznecka. You haven't gone?" And I'm like, "Nope." So they're like, "Okay, you want to get tested? Go do Mount Sznecka." So to carry this over, I did sign up. I got to go on an expedition with Casper, who was, you know, one of the original instructors for the academy. And Casper did this retreat over there. I helped out as an instructor, but that's where I got tested. That was like negative 10 degrees. The whole hike was brutal. I had blisters because I had the wrong boots. I mean, it was definitely a sufferfest the whole trip.
Right. Um, so then carrying that into like today, what does because everyone's got their own setup or what they can do for cold. Like I know in Florida, your water out of your tap probably doesn't get below, I don't know, 50, 60 or
70,
yeah, right,
70.
right. Yeah.
If
So
we're
for you to,
lucky in the winter, we'll get 69 or 68.
right, right. So, I mean, up here, I'm in Canada. So up in Canada, right now, I don't have a cold bath where I'm at. I got a shower. So every morning I do a shower, and it's cold, and I get cold enough. And for me, how I'm training right now, it's the mental game for me. It's like, okay, first thing in the morning, last thing I want to do, get cold. I'm just going to do it. And it's not so much the physical that I'm looking for. It's building what's between my ears right now. Right. But I'd just be interested. And I do a minute and a half every morning. I try and get to that, 11-minute mark by the end of the week. What do you do on like a maintenance weekly basis sort of thing?
Yeah, right now, just due to a living situation, I'm doing ice baths every 2 weeks. I wish it was more, but I have a chest freezer. It's at my mom's house. I'm actually about to convince her to let me get back in on it. But when I had accessibility to my freezer, I would do it 5 days and then take a day off and then let that rest, or even 2 days off and then do another 5 day rotation.
And
So,
would you do like 3 minutes or something?
so my story is that I recommend people to take 2 minutes for 30 days. If you have ice cold water consistently, you should do 2 minutes for 30 days. And by the end of the 30 days, you'll feel a huge difference in your ability to deal with the cold. Once you get past that zone of two for 30, it's really up to you to determine how far you want to push yourself. For example, I was with Wim, and I was telling him like, hey, two's pretty easy. And he's like, go do five. So he's like, you should push yourself to 5 minutes. And so then I started doing five. But five's tough. Five's tough at 32, 33.
Yeah.
But what I did is I used my knowledge in fitness training. And there's a book that teaches you about super compensation for powerlifting, like how to actually get strong using weight training. And I use those principles for cold exposure training. right? So you have to adjust the exposure or intensity, stress exposure of the cold cyclically, so that you can allow your body to have these moments of adaptation.
Right.
So what I like to recommend, if you're really about it, is doing 2 minutes day one, 2 minutes day two, 2 minutes day three, and then day four go to 5 minutes. Day five go to 5 minutes. Day six actually drop back down to 2 minutes, and then day seven rest. So what happens is, as you go through your twos, it's easy. Then you hit that five on that first one, and it's like, whoa, that was intense, and you feel it. You're like, whoo. Then you do the next day five. It's not as hard.
Right.
Then you go back down to your two, and you're like, oh, that's a joke.
All
Then you
day.
give yourself a rest day, right?
Right.
And then go back to a two, and it's a joke. And then you're like, oh, okay. So then I create this wave of high intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity. And it really allows the body to adapt nicely.
Right. It's kind of like that, like what they do on Everest, right? Like they acclimatize, then they come back down, then they go a little bit higher, then they come back down, right? Same sort of concept. Cool, man. Cool. Um, what about your workshops that you run? I saw online, and so I don't know anything about it. Is it Flow Studios or something like that you run something out of?
Okay, yeah. So every 2 weeks I just do a Wim Hof style breathwork session, and then I follow up with cold exposure ice baths. It's more about just building a community that wants to get into the Wim Hof method, but it's not like an actual fundamentals workshop. So in Raleigh, North Carolina, in June, I'm actually scheduled for a fundamentals workshop and an advanced workshop, and then I'll be back there in November to do that again.
Amazing, amazing. So if people want to check that out and where you're doing that, where they find that?
Yeah, they'll just go to the WimHofMethod.com website and then look for Benjamin as the instructor, and then there'll be upcoming events for me on the fundamentals and advanced workshops.
That's amazing. Amazing. Awesome. I saw so you do a bunch of movement stuff as well, right? You're into movement stuff. Um, I saw you I saw you watching people walking and commenting on them. And it was heal away all day. I got not much expertise in that in the movement zone. Talk to me about heal away all day.
Yeah, so biomechanics, right? Like understanding how the actual bones are moving in the gait pattern or running pattern. And so through my studies of physical therapy and trying to alleviate pain, I took so many different courses. I was working with a nonprofit that's in Asheville, North Carolina, that does farming education. So they have this huge database of YouTube videos of techniques for growing food organically, homesteading, blah blah blah. They wanted to incorporate health and wellness into their platform. And so they helped fund part of my education to go seek out these different experts of, fields of therapy and movement, whatever. So along this journey, really it's come down to how we properly articulate our bones through walking and running that really mimics what we've evolved to do as a human species, which is walk, run, throw. So those patterns all look alike. But what's happened is that through weight training, we've developed different mechanisms for using our bones and to lift objects. And to lift something, it requires a totally different initiation of our bones and our muscles than running and walking. So what can happen is through lifting, you can reprogram the software in your brain, your nervous system, to start using your bones like you would for lifting while you're doing walking and running. And then what ends up happening is you're getting a conflict of information at the joints, the connective tissue, and then people's joints start to rot out. So what I was pointing out to you in the video is like a majority of people through lifestyle, footwear, sitting, work habits, lifting habits, they've developed this pattern that we call front chain dominant, which is when your hips are in front of the rib cage. So you get this kind of like banana, you get this like banana shape of your hips being in front of your rib cage versus back chain, which is maybe I'm doing it backwards, but essentially you want to have your hips a little bit behind your rib cage, and that's how we look for forward locomotion. That all also goes down to the foot, how you load the foot. And so hopefully I'm making myself clear to you
Yeah.
that there's a program called GOATA, GOATA, GOATA. It stands for Greatest of All Time Actions. And it's based on film using slow motion video to record indigenous tribes people. So they have no modern influence, no modern footwear, no modern lifestyle. Professional athletes that do not get injured, like Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, Ed Reed, all these elite athletes that have long careers but don't have any injuries. And then you have elderly, we call them the GOATA elders. And essentially you have these people that are like 70 and 80 that are still cruising. They're still doing track and field events. They're still competing. And you're like, okay, wait, this older person's in a wheelchair. This person's competing at their highest level at 89. What's going on here? And then they overlaid all these videos of the mechanics and started to see it. Wait, the indigenous person walks like this, heel away all day. The Tom Brady, the Ed Reed uses heel away technology as well. And then the GOATA elder uses the same technology as well. And then the final population that they studied was babies. And so you look at the baby, that's the adolescent that hasn't had the full modernized approach to lifestyle, and they use the same technology, heel away all day. So it's really cool when you see all populations using the same technique in slow motion, that it starts to peel the veil and you're like, wait, this is true. People do actually use the heel away technology to move forward. It's just everyone else, which we call WOTA, which is worst of all time action, they're using the wrong technique. And the thing is like, it's so indoctrinated, like lifting is like, that's how people do fitness, like, oh, I'm going to go get fit. I'm going to go get healthy. They go to the gym, the box gym, and they start lifting weights. And they assume that that's how you get fit. So you do a lot of running. Have you done a lot of lifting before?
No, I hardly ever lift. So like, and it's interesting you say that, right? Like you look at a Ronnie Coleman, right? Like the fittest man, and he can't walk anymore. He literally
He's broken.
crutches. He's completely broken. I mean, he put his body through and put all sorts of things in, but yeah,
for what?
For what?
For the glory, for the metals that are rusting and getting dust on it. It's like, I get it. Like he pushed himself to limits that other people don't and haven't. But look what he's been rewarded.
Yeah.
In his actual physical body. And that's where I'm at. It's like, I used to be interested in bodybuilding. I wanted to be a men's physique Olympian, but I started having back pain. And then when I went to these physical therapy courses that were like the prestigious classes about back pain, it came to my attention that the lifting is what was causing the back pain. So then that was it. I mean, I had a therapist tell me, if I was you, and I'm like this huge jack guy. I mean, they were using me as the dummy for the class. They're like, oh, look at this guy's body. He can't even breathe into his diaphragm. He doesn't even know where his diaphragm is. and it's like, the therapist comes to me and is like, if I was you, I wouldn't load your spine for 30 days with a barbell. And now that's all I needed to hear, was that in this professional's opinion, they're like, you're in a state that if you loaded your spine, you could have a catastrophic injury. So that was it. I was done. Boom, no more.
So for someone like me who does run a lot, but I've never done an assessment, I've always just run off a feel. I run distance. I put a lot of miles on my feet. When you say heel away all day and the mechanics, from someone who doesn't have a background and a huge knowledge in that, what's like, and I'm putting you on the spot here, so maybe not, what's one or two things or that you could work on to improve having your hips positioned correctly? Or
so the biggest thing is just filming yourself. Set up a camera and then film yourself running towards the camera and running away from the camera, and then just being honest about what you're seeing. That's what I've been trained through my education with the certification through GOATA, is that I'm a video analyst now. So I can look at the slow motion video and look for specific cues on the body that allow me to say, okay, this is the adjustment you need to make.
Okay.
We're going to do this exercise here. So that's like part of the educational process through GOATA is actually becoming a slow motion film analyst. And then once you get past that, you can really like see what's going on. But if you don't want to go through any of that process, you can just simply set up your camera, take your phone, whatever, set it up, run away from the camera, run towards the camera, and it's pretty obvious. Your heels will either come in or your heels will flip away. And really, like the technical terminology is that as you're landing into your landing leg and you're loading into that leg, as you go to propel yourself off that leg and push off the ground, that entire column or leg needs to internally rotate. So it's just like when you swing a bat, that backside leg is going to internally rotate. Or if you're going to throw a punch, your leg in the back's going to spin inside. So that internal rotation that we technically should be doing all the time through walking and running is very noticeable once you see it. But the other thing that's noticeable is the opposite, which is an external rotation off the propulsion. And that's where a lot of people are stuck is when they go to push off that ground, their heel flips externally rotating. And so they're like dragging their legs around versus just rolling it inside.
Is this kind of, I'm not sure if you know, I'm sure you do. Is this kind of a lot of the stuff that David Weck talks about too with his movement? Do you know who David Weck?
Yeah. I was interested in Weck method as well. I used to roll the ropes. I was big on flow ropes when it started popping off in the early COVID situation. I can roll the rope too. But the thing is that there's a conflict between the two camps.
Right.
David Weck is both sides utilized, which is that he wants you to be able to push heavily through the big toe, which is your inside edge. And then the thing is like he has two comparisons of like when you need to fight, you need to be able to push down on your big toe. When you need to flee, that's when you're using the outside edge. So he's a big proponent of both sides utilized. That's his whole methodology, which it sounds reasonable, but I want people to recognize that unless you're walking and running like the indigenous or Tom Brady's and you're really embodying that flipping of the heel away, all that strength training that they're doing over at Weck Method, it may not be contributing to those mechanics.
It's kind of like you got to build that base layer and have that base layer done that heel away.
But again, like, what's the point, right? Like, as a species, as a human, like how much weight were we carrying as we evolved, right? Like when we hunted and we caught a kill with a bow and arrow, whatever, how much did we really carry? I mean, I know they quartered it up, they chopped it up into little pieces, they divvied the workout, they passed the workout. So it's like, should we really be spending time lifting heavy? I mean, for sport performance, that's the claim. Oh, well, if you want to be big and bad, you got to lift strong and big. Like, cool. I can see that, but I'm just talking from my own experience. When I lifted, I got back pain. When I lifted, my heels don't flip in or flip out like they should. So, I mean, it's hard. I got an argument with a friend. He wants to do lifting. He's done knees over toes guy with Ben Green, whatever his name is. So I'm like, dude, unless you're moving better on the film, what's the point? Like my lifting with GOATA, they do lift weights, but it's not called lifting weights. We move weights. Okay. So there's a big difference between like taking it and moving it vertically versus pushing. Right? The way you engage through a push is way different than when you lift.
Right.
And if you look at the film of powerlifters, Olympic powerlifters, and they're doing perfect technique. They're the masters of it, right? Their feet will come up, they'll go back, and they'll land a little out. So what is that? That's reverse. They took the weight, super heavy, perfect technique, but they moved backwards. I'm not interested in that anymore. You
Right.
know, like I started lifting at 12 years old. I started having back pain around 23. 23 is when I was my absolute biggest. I was like 220, just yoked, monster. But the thing is I had back pain.
Right.
So I used to have people tell me all the time, "Oh, your technique. Oh my God, you squat like Tom Platz and you got legs like Tom Platz and you look awesome and blah blah blah." But I was broken, like and look at Ronnie Coleman,
Right.
broken. So I'm not interested in that. I'm
Love it.
not interested in that.
It's an awesome message, man. I love that. That functionality, right? Where do you want to be when you're 80, right? You got that, you have that long-term vision of like, what am I doing today that's going to put me in the spot that I want to be at when I'm 80, 90, 100 years old. So that's amazing. Ben, man, thank you so much for your time. That was awesome. I loved everything you had to offer. I think you gave a lot of value. Just real quick, if you want to point whoever's listening to your stuff, what you're doing, anything you offer, your website, your Instagram. Yeah, why don't you do that?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Ben Pelton Plan. That's where I'm mostly on, and we got another website called breathetheday.com. You can connect with us through there. We do corporate wellness, breathwork as well. I do breathwork assessments and movement assessments. So yeah, just reach out. I'm always here to talk.
I love it. I love it. Bro, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right.